In today's video, I'm going to show you how to build your deck around its greatest weakness. Do you ever feel like your deck is just a house of cards waiting to be toppled down by that one spell? You built up this entire strategy or this entire board state that looks like it's going well on its own, but as soon as you're hit with just a little bit of interaction or one little stacks piece, your strategy goes all the way out and the game is essentially over for you. Imagine your deck is a mighty fortress. Even the strongest walls have weak points. And that's why we're talking about silver bullets in Magic the Gathering. They're not just answers, they're insurance policies for your strategy. Whether you're going wide, tall, combo, or control, we'll explore how to bulletproof these game plans against those threats that are lurking in your opponent's hands. So buckle up and let's get ready to transform your deck from glass cannon into an impenetrable stronghold. Let's get into it. So when playing a game of Commander, it's crucial to understand what stands in your way of victory. Every deck has a weakness, and the first step as a deck builder and a Commander player is knowing what that weakness is. You can't always expect to just fill up your Commander deck with gas. You have to add the rest of the car to it. You have to add that protection. Your deck should aim to invest plenty of cards into stopping the thing that stops you the most, or ways to go under those strategies that may stop you. Both the deck building process and the game itself offers these challenges to you, which is why playing your deck, assessing problems, and changing your decks over time should be a common occurrence of us deck builders. Every deck is a work in progress. So let me give you a couple of examples. Here are 4 simple strategies that are very common throughout Commander, and here are some ways that they typically get stopped. When you're going wide, you're super weak to board wipes, which are very prevalent in Commander. When you're going tall, you're really weak to single target removal. If you're playing combo, you're weak to things like counter magic and stacks pieces that can stop you from doing your combo. And if you're playing a slower strategy like control, you're usually weak to aggressive players and players that want to combo off as early as possible. Each of these strategies has a weak point. If they didn't have these weak points, everyone would play these strategies all the time, and there would only be one strategy in Commander. So we need to find ways to build around these deficiencies. Let me take it back to my Othari deck for an example. In that Othari deck, I have one crucial target, and that is my Othari. If Othari is gone, most of the strategy just gets destroyed. And as the game goes on, I get a wider and wider board state. So it's a very interesting combo between Voltron E as well as going wide. So I'm really weak to single target removal, and I'm super weak to board wipes. So what do I do to combat this? Well, I run plenty of things that can, one, protect Othari on its own, and I also run plenty of cards that allow me to protect my entire board state. Things like Sujiri's Shelter allow me to protect my entire board, whereas things like Surge of Salvation allow me to protect Othari. And this is just one example. There's other ways to deal with these problems, which is why you as a deck builder need to get creative. So let's take Lazav as another example. In Lazav, the same thing is the problem. I have a single commander, and he's the one doing all of the swinging. So I'm super weak to single target removal. And in this deck, I'm also weak to graveyard hate. So what do I run? Well, I run plenty of counter magic, and I also decide to give Lazav keywords that make him hard to target. Things like Shroud, Hexproof, and even just some ward costs. Also, I give him evasion that he can't be blocked. This is so if somebody does have a very big blocker that can kill Lazav, I make sure that I can still win that combat because nobody can block him. So both of these decks have the same problem, one attacker, but they tackle the problem in different ways. Now, what determines the best way to actually deal with these problems? Well, the color palette is definitely a big indicator of how you're going to choose to protect your strategy. In Lazav, I'm in Dimir, so I can only use blue for counter magic and bounce spells, I can use artifacts for my evasion, and I can use black for removal for big threats. But I can't use those cards in Othari. I don't have access to counter magic, but I still have good access to removal, and because white is so great, I have plenty of instant speed protection spells that I can hold up similar to counter magic. So, same problem, different solution. Your job as a deck builder is to understand what is your colors, what is your strategy, and what is the best way to deal with this strategy in these colors. And also, just because the strategies might be similar, they do get stopped in very different ways, which is why you have to deal with them in different ways. So going back to the different kinds of strategies and how they get stopped the most, what are the solutions to these strategies when they get stopped? So going wide. you're really weak to board wipes. So what should you do? Counter magic if you're in blue, and also board wipe protection if you're in white. In most cases, if you're going wide, you're gonna be in one of these two colors anyways. Now, of course, if you're not, there are plenty of other ways to deal with this. I would recommend, if you don't want to get board wiped and you're not in either blue or white, one way you can also deal with this strategy is by wanting and being okay with your board being wiped, either through some Zulaport cutthroat effects, or you get a return on your investment if your things die through like treasures. Now, going tall, you're weak to a lot of single target removal and board wipes as well. Basically, you have one or two threats that are big on the board. Simply the response of dies to removal is kind of correct. So what can you do to stop this? Well, you can give evasive keywords like Shroud, Hexproof, or Ward. You can run counter spells again, or you can go with a lot of mana and some card advantage. If you invest in big mana sources, your threats can be dealt with, and you can always just have more threats that you can play with plenty of mana. Of course, the evasive keywords and the counter spells are simple. You get to protect your strategy as they go. But similar to the going wide, wanting your stuff to die, this is another way around that. You're kind of okay if your stuff gets removed. You'll simply just play something else because you have so much mana and so much card draw that you're able to do that. So we've covered going wide and going tall. What's next? Combos. You're weak to counter magic and you're weak to stacks. Maybe something like a Deafening Silence is only allowing you to play one non-creature spell per turn. Or maybe somebody's playing blue and they have counter magic and they're able to stop your combo and its most important part. What is your solution? Well, of course, counter magic yourself is also really good. That's the most obvious answer. And when you get into things like CEDH, that's typically how it goes. You put a combo on the board, you fight over it with counter magic with your opponents. But there's a few other ways. Another common thing is you can silence your opponents, either through your own Deafening Silence if you have a creature combo, or an activated abilities combo, or a combo that doesn't actually require a bunch of spells. Grand Abolisher effects are really good too. You can shut down artifacts. You can play your own kind of stacks pieces or silent effects that can allow you to win the game. Things like Cutzel have been amazing in a lot of my decks because it stops players from interacting on my turn. And a really important one, if you're not in any of these white or green effects, is Defense Grid. Yes, Defense Grid is symmetrical, so it will be harder for you to stop people. However, if you're the only combo deck at the table, Defense Grid is an amazing option. That counterspell now costs 5 mana, and no one in their right mind is going to hold up 5 mana worth of spells. And the last thing that you can help win with a combo is by removing things. Let's say there's a certain enchantment out there that's maybe making your combo give adverse effects, or there's an artifact like Grafdigger's Cage that won't let you play your graveyard combo. You'll need to have plenty of removal to deal with these stacks pieces so that you can end up winning the game. So there's 3 now: going wide, going tall, and combo. The last one is control. And control, again, you're weak to aggressive plays and you're weak to combos itself. Now, how do you make sure you have a game plan so that you can get to the late game where you truly shine? Well, we can look at the 3 strategies that we've talked about previously and how those are stopped. And that's essentially the way that you want to deal with these things. Your goal is to get to the late game and stop the other decks from doing what they need to do so that you can get to the point where you're playing your strategy as best as possible. So going wide, they're weak to board wipes. You should run board wipes. Going tall, they're weak to single target removal. Make sure that you have single target removal. And combos, they're weak to counter magic and stacks. So make sure you have at least a couple of those as well. Now, here's the even bigger brain play. You know that these strategies are weak to these types of removal. You can also imply that they might have ways to protect it, like we're talking about in this video. So you should run a combination of things that are good against their strategy, as well as good against the things that are good against your strategy, if that makes sense. So you're playing against somebody that's going wide. You know that they're going to have counter magic or board wipe protection. You should run things that will stop them as soon as possible so that they can't get wide in the first place. Things like cheap early removal that's efficient, that can either go more than 1 for 1 or just start countering the thing that furthers their strategy the most. You know that they're going to have board wipe protection, so things that are most important would be something like Toxic Deluge and sweepers that get around stuff like Indestructible or Hexproof. You know that the tall players are going to try to give evasive keywords. You know that they're going to try to have counter spells and maybe even some big mana or card advantage that can keep them in the game. Your goal should be to counter the card advantage. Your goal should be to counter the spells that give them those evasive keywords. Because in most cases, other players are going to have solutions to their problem. And then, of course, for combos, they're going to have counter magic. There's not much you can really do about that. you should almost always have counter magic if you're playing control, as that gives you the most agency over what you're going to stop. But you also know they're going to have silence effects, things like a Cutzel or a Grand Abolisher or a Deafening Silence. This is where you should have cheap and easy removal like enchantment removal and creature removal in your control deck. So to summarize, for control decks, of course, you want to just run a ton of interaction that can stop your opponents from doing things. You should probably run a ton of cards that work against a variety of strategies, especially modal spells. In control, the name of the game is to have efficient removal that can get you more than just one card for one card, and modal spells for that flexibility of maybe an artifact is what's stopping you, maybe a creature is what's stopping you. You gotta have things that can deal with all of it at once. And of course, in control, for goodness sake, please run sweepers as best as you can. In the newest set, Duskmourn, we got a 3-mana board wipe. Can you believe that? Now, of course, it's mortal and situational. You either kill all the tapped creatures or the untapped creatures, but it's 3 mana. That to me is an auto include every time. So these are the strategies, and this is how you stop their strategies, and this is how you build around how to stop those strategies. We've gone quite a few layers deep into this, and the last point I want to cover is how much of this protection should you run? Well, the answer to that is simple. You should run the amount of protection you need for the amount of answers you believe you'll see in a game. So in my Othari deck, a lot of it is single target removal and board wipe removal that I'm protecting from. Do you know how common that is in something like Commander? It is so common. When there's 3 other players, there's bound to be at least 1 to 2 removal spells at any given point in players' hands. So because of that, I had to invest up to 16 cards to protect Othari. This means I had to almost slow down my game plan a little bit so that I could make sure I was actually doing the game plan. But it's fine. Because I invested so much into it, the strategy runs super efficiently all the time. Let's say your strategy revolves around Graveyard. How much do you really need to build around Graveyard hate? Of course, there are a lot of cards that give Graveyard hate and that allow people to exile graveyards. But how common is that truly in Commander? Not super common. So in things like my Muldrotha deck, I just run a couple counter spells and I run one card that gives me Hexproof. And I haven't really run into any problems since. So to conclude with that, you need to run the amount of cards to protect your strategy in a ratio that makes sense for how much of that removal and that type of removal will stop your strategy. It all depends on your local meta, it all depends on your strategy, and it all depends on how you personally want to deal with threats. So that was my video on silver bullets in Commander and how you can protect your strategy from toppling over. I hope this was able to help transform your deck from a glass cannon into an impenetrable stronghold. Thank you all for watching.